because he taught a series of distinguished members of Parliament and archaeologists and heads of the BBC and so on, didn't he?
Yes, he did. And did you say historians?
Yes.
Colin Matthew, I think.
Yes, that's right. Yeah. So outstanding. Anyway, at the end of SEDBA, you applied just to Oxford, or?
No.
We ought to actually do national service, shouldn't we, really?
Well, if I could just go back a bit, the timing of this may be very uninteresting, but I think to people nowadays it would seem quite odd, because one did what was then called higher certificate. And then I went to Oxford to try and do a scholarship 2 terms later. And rather to everybody's surprise, I got a small one. And I then stayed on for 2 terms after that to try and get a better one, unsuccessfully. But it did mean that one was there for sort of 5 terms after A-level, which would seem very odd, I think, to anybody nowadays. I have a great debt to my housemaster, Bill Forster, because Andrew had done a sort of deal with John Prestwich at Queen's that I would go there to some sort of Hastings scholarship.
Yes, the Hastings scholarship.
And my housemaster said, who was a Cambridge man, and didn't really know an awful lot about Oxford colleges, I think. But he said, no, I don't think that's right. Bingham of Bailey. And I regard that as a sort of providential decision. Not that I've anything at all against Queen's, but I put a very, 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 very great deal for Bailey.
So you got your minor scholarship,
yeah,
not Hastings, and then you went on national service.
Yes.
Tell me about that.
Did you do this yourself?
No, I just missed it.
Just missed it. Well, it was a sort of curious experience in a way, because standards were so different, partly out of loyalty to my paternal roots. I applied to join the Royal Ulster Rifles that were headquartered at Ballymena in County Antrim. By this stage, of course, one had gone through the initial sort of medical and everything, and I do recall with amusement the medical, who was a sort of sergeant. This is before one had joined up or anything. A sergeant who said, "Are you a good scholar?" And I said, "No, not very, thank you. My mom is the water box." And he said, "Well, can you read and write?" So then one arrived at Ballymena, and Aracon of 40 people, 30 people. Some of whom, I mean, it was quite a lively subject of discussion. I recall whether the food was better at Wormwood Scrubs or Pentonville. And they were mostly recruits from London because there was no conscription in the North of Ireland. And then after a month there, as a sort of potential candidate for a commission, the practice was that anybody from any one of the 4 rifle regiments went to the Green Jackets depot at Winchester, and so one was in what's now called the Peninsular Barracks at Winchester, which was an absolutely superb establishment, in my opinion, because it combined very, very high standards with a lot of intelligence, which is a rare mixture, I think, in the army. And so one spent a couple of months there. Then one went off to a thing called WASB, War Office Selection Board, which determined if you were thought to be sort of officer material, and if you were, you then went to Eton Hall in just outside Chester, if you wanted to be an infantry officer, which is what was I did. I joined this regiment partly because of my paternal loyalties, partly because it was in Korea at the time, and I thought it would be very exciting actually to go to war. But by the time I was commissioned, they'd come out of Korea and they were in Hong Kong. But by that stage, I was very loyal to them, and so I didn't want to go to anybody else. So I stayed with them and was commissioned in Lawrence Rifles.
And then you went to Hong Kong?
Yes.
Mm.
I took out a draft of 60 men on a boat. You went out by ship in those days, and it took nearly a month, which was a wonderful way of spending time, because they were all sitting on the deck of the ship reading Russian novels for hours and hours every day.
Did you enjoy Hong Kong?
Yes, it was curiously remote. We were up very close to the border in the new territories, and one only got down to the bright lights about once a month or something like that. So it was extremely hot and really quite primitive. Everybody suffered from terrible skin diseases because of the heat and the moisture.
Mm.
So it wasn't altogether a picnic. But I enjoyed the whole experience quite enormously, and very, very nearly stayed in the army.
Nearly stayed in it?
Yes.
Did you?
Mm. I served when we came back to this country. I was only in Hong Kong from May to October, and then we had another wonderful journey home by sea. And then for the remainder of the time, we were in Colchester, and I was serving under a man who was actually one of the most highly decorated soldiers in the army. He didn't have a VC, but he won the MC twice in his first year of commissioned service, and he got 2 more DSOs in the course of the 39-45 war, and then he acquired another DSO later, and he was an absolutely mesmeric man and a wonderful soldier.
What was his name?
Breeden.
Breeden.
B-R-E-D-I-N. He was always known as Barla Breeden. I think everybody in the army in those days had a nickname, and he was thought to have looked like a racehorse called Barla. He wasn't a good-looking man, but he was a very, very, very attractive man.
So you
and he rather wanted one to stay in the army and pursue what he called the proud profession of arms.
But you managed just to resist. And
I thought it was sensible to take up one's place at Oxford.
So you went to Balliol in 1954.
54.
And who were your teachers at Balliol?
Dick Southern.
Oh yes, the great medievalist.
Yes. Christopher Hill.
Yes.
The senior of the four, who never wrote anything and is very little known, very, very long-serving college tutor and dean called A.B. Lodger. And there was a younger man, a Cambridge man, I think actually a King's man, called John Prest.
Yes, he came around that time, didn't he?
Yes.
Yeah.
So it was a very powerful team of 4 people, and they actually did all I think they did all the college teaching between them.
Christopher had a stammer, didn't he? Or sort of
a slight sort of hesitation in his speech, yes.
Yeah, he used to lecture in Balliol Hall. I used to go and sit near the front and listen to him lecturing, and there was a slight sort of catch in his voice. I remember. Was he a good teacher?
Yes, he certainly was. And the last thing, there was somebody wrote an article years later saying that he'd indoctrinated his pupils with his Marxist views and so on, which simply couldn't be less true. But he did undoubtedly have greater sympathy with some of his pupils than others. And, he and Keith Thomas, for example.
Yes. Did you know Keith then?
Yes.
When he was an undergraduate?
Yes. Keith was a year ahead.
He won that great history prize, I can't remember what it was called, at Oxford, jointly with my teacher, James Campbell. The two who was a medievalist, and they shared this, whatever it was, the stubs or whatever prize.
Did he? Did he? Yes.
But he was really very close to Christopher, as you
Very,
said.
very close indeed to Christopher. There was also somebody who wrote a rather good book, or several rather good books, and died very young, called Ralph, I think he pronounced it, Samuel.
Oh yes, Raphael. Raphael Samuel, yeah.
Yes, Raphael, yes.
That's right.
And he didn't call himself that at Oxford.
Yes, History Workshop.
Yes, and all that.
Yeah.
And Christopher and he undoubtedly got on extremely well. So I was, never on that sort of net with Christopher, but he was a wonderful tutor. And I recall with immense gratitude, because I started off reading PPE, and I decided I wasn't any good at that. And so I switched back to history, and I think on the second term we had a collection, and I'd written something.
The collection is when you get your reports on your...
Well, you write a sort of exam.
Oh, that's right, yes, yeah.
At the beginning of term.
Yeah,
I mean, it's meant
right.
to test what you've been reading during the vacation. And I recall that Christopher on this read "Good Enough for Schools Any Day," which was hugely encouraging at once. Second year, wasn't it?
And what was Dick Southern like as a teacher?
Well, he was also extremely good, but also, of course, related better to people who were on the same wavelength. And he did operate at quite an abstruse sort of level. I can recall one session that he had with everybody about a month before schools, when we were all wanting him to give us, easy answers to various questions that we thought might come up in the paper. And so we all gathered in his room when we had the session, and somebody asked a question, and he said, "Well, that's a very, very good question, but we just don't know the answer to it." Whereas maybe Roger would have said, 3 points, my boy. But he was a very engaging man.
Did you come across Hugh Trevor Roper at all?
No, I never did, only by name.
He was teaching around that time. And John Habakkuk was also...
Well, again, a name to me. No, I never met him.
What else were you doing at Oxford apart from working, or were you again not dissipating your energies on other things?
Well, I would think I wasn't really dissipating very much. We had a terrifically sort of vibrant life inside the college. With, there was a sort of rather drunken debating club. And it wasn't really, but people made speeches, some of which were incredibly bad and boring, and others of which were actually brilliantly funny. And you've got a mixture of the two. Everybody got. So I mean, there were lots of things sort of going on like that. But I never participated in the Oxford Union. Where I made a speech, I think. Well, I did make a speech on the paper once, but that was all. And most of us, I think, didn't participate very much in that. Didn't really pursue the political clubs very much. I think we were a slightly inbred sort of society, really. Did you know a medieval historian called Maurice Keane?
Yes.
Well,
Worked on medieval outlaws and things like that.
That's right.
Robin Hood and things.
And the laws of war.
Yeah.
Well, Maurice was an exact contemporary of mine, and we were close, and are close friends. And so there were some extremely interesting and attractive people there. Which was your college?
Worcester.
Worcester.
I had Harry Pitt and James Campbell there. Do you, I mean, apart from Maurice Keane, do you remember any of your contemporaries, other contemporaries?
Oh yes.
You kept in touch with any of them?
Yes. somebody who's just twin sons of Walter Oakeshott, who was the rector of Lincoln at the time, when he left Winchester. Robert was a member of Balliol, a very live wire indeed. Peter Brook, who father was the former Home Secretary, and he himself became Secretary of State for Northern Ireland and Culture and Paymaster General and military things. So I kept in touch with him. I still see him. And Keith, I still.
Keith.
I mean, he wasn't a close chum then. I suppose, in a way, I've come closer to him since.
You presumably, if you kept your nose down and worked hard, you got a first, did you?
Yes.
And what then did you do? You'd foregone the church and you foregone the army, so it was...
Well, I'd already decided, I mean, about halfway through, I think, the second year, again, Lord Fitzmont was going to have to do something, because I didn't see myself as an academic historian, partly because I always thought Morris would be much better. And so my mother said, I think you would do all right at the bar. So I said, all right, if that's what you want. And so I joined an inn, which meant starting to eat some dinners.
Starting to...
You had to eat dinners.
Why
yes.
do you have to eat dinners?
I mean, I think that's a very good question, but the sort of textbook answer to it
to which we know don't know
that it introduces people to the sort of conventions of ethics and sort of standards of the profession, and gets people to know each other a bit. And there are sometimes sort of talks and debates and things after dinner. It's a relic of the days when the students were sort of full-time, sort of proper students as they are in Oxbridge colleges, sort of living together and dining together. It's sort of relic, but it's been, in those days you had to eat quite a lot of dinners each term, each law term for 3 years or something. And
how many were there? Did you have to eat?
I think you had to eat 3 for each of 4 terms for 3 years or something like that. I actually got let off a lot at the end.
And how many a week? I mean, one a week or several a week?
Well, you could eat them on 3 successive nights.
I see.
But there was just this...
Well, just 3 dinners a week, a term?
Yes.
Oh, wow. I mean, at Cambridge College, you had to dine in every evening.
Did you really?
Up till a generation ago, yes.
Really? We didn't. I mean, the institute, but it was quite tiresome going up from Oxford in order to have dinner and then rush back again. And I didn't find it educational, but
what else were you, I mean, how were you formally learning about law? You were doing that at Oxford?
No. In those days, if you did a degree in some other subject, the usual thing was simply to go to a crammer. And there was a very, very expert firm of crammers who knew exactly what you needed to know to pass. And they dictated long notes to you, and you wrote them down. And it was very uneducational. I mean, I recall an occasion when somebody sort of put his hand up and said, oh, you know, please, I don't understand that. And the lecturer said, it doesn't matter whether you understand it or not, just learn it by heart. And if you did learn it by heart and wrote it out and answered the right question, you passed the exam. So, and it was quite quick in those days. I mean, you could do it extremely quickly if you worked hard enough.
How quickly?
Well, I knew somebody who did it all in both part 1 and part 2. You had to do part 2 even if you did have a degree in law. But somebody who did both parts in 5 months.
What did you do at the end? You did an exam on this road to learning, did you, at the end? Or what?
Yes.
What was that called?
It was called the bar final.
Bar final. And it wasn't particularly demanding.
No. I mean, very easy to pass.
And once you passed that, what were you?
Well, you were nothing until you got called to the bar, but you then became a pupil to somebody who was an active practitioner, a junior, and one had already fixed that up on a sort of college basis, really. I remember Bailey of the generation before mine said, "I hear you're going to the bar," and I said, "Yes." And he said, "Well, why didn't you come into a pupillage in my chambers?" And I said, "Fine." I mean, nowadays it's all much more open to competition.
Were you, I mean, right at that beginning, did you find law an intriguing, interesting field, as say compared to history? I mean, when you read about it.
I think I always preferred history, really, and I enjoy the historical aspects of the law. It's a great weakness, this, that I probably shouldn't confess to. But I've always found it quite hard to get excited about legal questions that aren't related to the solution of particular cases. So a debate about some sort of abstract legal principle leaves me rather cold. Don't, give me a dispute between X and Y that involves the principle, then I will be very interested in it.
Well, it's much in keeping with the English legal tradition in many ways, which has been about particular issues rather than the French fashion of going for general principle debates.
Yes, I think it's something to do with the mindset of practitioners and judges. I mean, Tom Denning used to say, "Oh, I don't understand jurisprudence." And I think there will be a lot of us who would say that. But there are some who are very good and are sort of philosophers.
Were there any teachers at that early stage, anyone who affected the way you thought about law? I mean, if it was just a grammar school, perhaps there wasn't.
No, they were able and intelligent people, actually. And somebody called John Widgery, who was Lord Widgery, became Lord Chief Justice, had actually once been a partner of a firm of these crammers. That's how he started his career. They say they were really jolly good. I mean, I rather over-budgeted, I think, of what one needed to know. As a result, I actually sort of came out at the top of the list, and the partners of the crammer gave me lunch at the Charing Cross Hotel.
How long a list was this that you came top of?
Well, a whole lot compliments. I think lots of them from overseas. I don't quite long lists in those days.
And have you kept in touch with any of the people who were on that course?
No,
it was just too short, really.
Yes.
And you were coming from different places and just going to classes, and that was that.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, there was someone who I came across independently afterwards, but no, it was a very businesslike and unsocial sort of function.